I knew something was wrong the second my headlights swept across the front lawn. It was not trash. It was my belongings, thrown out in wet cardboard boxes and torn bags. My heart went cold when I spotted Grandpa's velvet camera case lying wide open and empty in the grass. My sister thought she was erasing me from this house. But she made a fatal mistake. She did not know that Grandpa never stopped recording. My name is Chloe Thomas. I am 35 years old, and I had been gone for exactly 4 days on a corporate compliance trip to Chicago. The airline tag was still looped tightly around the handle of my rolling suitcase, fluttering in the night wind as I turned into my driveway. I was exhausted, the kind of bone-deep tired that makes your eyes burn, and all I wanted was to unlock my front door, drop my bags, and sleep for 12 hours. But the moment my headlights swept across the front yard, the exhaustion vanished, replaced by a jolt of adrenaline that tasted like copper in my mouth. It looked like a grenade had gone off in my living room, except the debris field was not inside. It was outside. It was scattered across the wet grass of the front lawn. I killed the engine, but I did not step out immediately. I just sat there, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was not trash. It was not the neighbor's recycling blown over by the wind. It was my life. My clothes were piled in heaping sodden mounds. My books, the ones I had spent years collecting, were splayed open like dead birds, their pages fluttering helplessly in the breeze. Framed photographs of my college graduation and trips to the coast were face down in the dirt. The motion sensor light on the garage flickered on, illuminating the scene in a harsh, clinical white glare. That was when I saw the velvet box. It was Grandpa Everett's camera case, the vintage one, the one he had told me never to leave in direct sunlight, let alone on the damp ground in the middle of the night. It was lying open, the velvet lining exposed to the elements, and it was completely empty. I stepped out of the car. The silence of the neighborhood felt heavy, almost suffocating. To my left, the porch light of the neighbors turned on. A curtain twitched. Then, just as quickly, the light snapped off. They were watching. Of course they were watching. In a suburb like this, a spectacle on the front lawn was better than cable television. I could feel their eyes on me, judging the mess, wondering what Chloe Thomas had done to deserve being evicted from her own life. But I had not been evicted. I owned this house. Grandpa had left it to me, not her. I walked up the driveway, the sound of my heels clicking on the concrete echoing too loudly in the quiet street. I stepped over a pile of my winter coats, soaking up the dew, and approached the front door. I stopped. The door frame was mangled. Deep, jagged silver scratches marred the black paint around the deadbolt and the handle. It looked violent, frantic. Someone had taken a screwdriver or a crowbar to the wood, trying to force their way in. I traced the gouges with my fingertip. The wood was splintered, raw and sharp, but as I looked closer, I realized something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The door had not been forced open. The jamb was intact. The lock mechanism was still seated properly. Whoever had done this had tried to break in, failed, and then, terrifyingly, they had used a key. They wanted it to look like a break-in. They wanted it to look like vandalism, but a vandal does not have a key to the front door. I pushed the door open. It swung silent and heavy on its hinges. The air inside did not smell like a home. It smelled of violation. It was the scent of stale air stirred up by frantic movement. I did not call out. I did not scream for help. I worked in risk management. I knew that panic was the enemy of evidence. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my phone, and swiped to the video camera. I hit record. "Time is 11:42 at night," I whispered, my voice shaking slightly before I steadied it. "I am entering my residence. There are signs of forced entry attempts on the exterior." But the lock was disengaged with a key. I moved through the foyer, the camera lens sweeping over the destruction. It was not a robbery. A robber takes the television. A robber takes the laptop sitting on the coffee table. A robber looks for cash and jewelry. The television was untouched. My laptop was sitting exactly where I had left it. This was personal. This was a tantrum manifest in physical space. Cheap items were destroyed. The vase I bought at a discount store was shattered against the wall. The throw pillows were slashed, but the antique clock on the mantel? Untouched. The silver candlesticks? Still standing. This was a calculated rage. Whoever did this knew exactly what mattered to me and what had value to the estate. They were looking for something specific. I walked into the kitchen. The drawers were pulled out, silverware scattered across the tiles like metal bones, but my eyes went immediately to the small utility cabinet next to the refrigerator. This was where Grandpa used to keep his tools, his screwdrivers, his pliers, his rolls of electrical tape. It was the heart of the house's maintenance. I approached it slowly, the camera still running. The drawer was gone, not just empty. The entire drawer had been pulled out and was missing. The cavity gaped like a missing tooth. Someone had taken the whole thing. "Grandpa's tool drawer is missing," I narrated for the recording. I turned to the dining room table. Before I left for Chicago, I had left a stack of paperwork there. It was the inheritance file, the thick binder of legal documents regarding the transfer of the estate. I had been organizing it, preparing to file the final taxes. The binder was there, but it was open. Papers were strewn across the table and the floor. I set the phone down, propping it against a sugar bowl so it continued to record me, and I began to sift through the documents. The deed was there. The tax assessments were there. The original will was safe in a deposit box at the bank. Thank God. But as I flipped through the pages, my stomach dropped. One sheet was missing. It was a durable power of attorney document, an old copy that Grandpa had signed years ago giving authority to the primary resident to make emergency decisions regarding the property infrastructure. It was outdated, technically superseded by the will, but in the wrong hands, it could be used to convince a utility company, a locksmith, or a county clerk that someone else had the right to speak for this house. It was the only piece of paper missing. My phone buzzed against the table, the vibration sounding like a saw against the wood. I picked it up. A text message notification lit up the screen. It was from Kendra. There were just 3 words. "Home yet?" There was a single emoji, a wink with its tongue out. It was not a question. It was a timer. She knew exactly when my flight landed. She knew exactly how long it took to drive from the airport. She was probably sitting in her apartment right now, staring at her phone, imagining my face as I stood in the wreckage of my living room. She wanted me to call her screaming. She wanted me to drive over to her place and pound on her door so she could call the police and file a restraining order, painting me as the unstable, hysterical younger sister who could not handle the pressure of the inheritance. She wanted a reaction. I looked at the text message. Then I looked at the empty drawer where Grandpa used to keep his tools. Then I looked at the door that had been opened with a key she should not have had. I did not reply. I walked to the front door, closed it, and threw the deadbolt. Then I dragged a heavy dining chair over and wedged it under the handle. I took a deep breath, inhaling the smell of the disrupted dust. My hands stopped shaking. The fear was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. It was the same feeling I got when I found a discrepancy in a compliance audit, the realization that someone was trying to cheat the system. Kendra thought this was the end of the story. She thought she had broken me. She thought that by throwing my life onto the lawn, she had won. She had no idea what she had just started. "If this is a story," I said aloud to the empty, broken room, "it is going to be my story, not hers." I picked up my phone again. I did not call the police yet. I did not call my parents. I walked toward the basement door. Grandpa had told me once that the house had eyes. I never understood what he meant until tonight. Kendra thought she was the only one watching. She was wrong. Grandpa Everett was the one who raised me. My parents were around, certainly, but they were intermittent figures, like satellites that only orbited close enough to be seen on holidays or birthdays. Grandpa was the gravity. He taught me how to tie my shoes, how to balance a checkbook, and how to load a film camera without exposing the negative. This house was not just a collection of wood and brick to me, it was the physical manifestation of being chosen. When he passed away 18 months ago, he left the property to me. And that decision drove a wedge between Kendra and me that no amount of family therapy could ever dislodge. Kendra saw the house as a portfolio asset. She saw the square footage, the market value in a gentrifying neighborhood, and the potential rental income. I saw the scratch in the hallway floorboards where I dropped a heavy tripod when I was 12. I saw the height chart etched into the pantry doorframe. Kendra hated that I had the keys because she believed that as the oldest, the inheritance was her birthright. She had sued me. Of course, she dragged me through 6 months of probate court, trying to prove that Grandpa was not of sound mind when he signed the final will. She lost. The judge saw the medical records, the clear intent, and dismissed her claim with prejudice. That was the moment she stopped screaming and started plotting. I work as a senior risk analyst for a compliance firm. My entire career is built on understanding one terrifying truth, which is that you do not need a weapon to destroy someone. You only need the right paperwork. I see it every day. People lose their insurance coverage because of a missed signature. Companies collapse because of a buried clause in a vendor contract. Documentation is the most sterile, efficient way to commit murder. Kendra had learned this lesson too, likely from her own bitterness. She realized she could not win with emotion, so she decided to win with bureaucracy. Just before I left for this trip to Chicago, she had come over. It was the first time she had visited in 3 months without a lawyer present. She stood on the porch, smiling that tight, practiced smile she uses when she wants something. She asked if she could store a few boxes in the garage because she was repainting her apartment. Then, casually, she asked for a spare key. She said it was for emergencies, in case the water heater burst while I was at work, or if there was a fire. I told her no. I told her the garage was full. I told her the neighbors had a spare key for emergencies. The smile vanished. She did not yell. She just leaned against the porch railing, looking at the house like she was already measuring it for new curtains. She told me that I could keep the house with locks, but she would take it with the law. I remember the chill that went down my spine. It was not a threat of violence. It was a statement of intent. She was telling me she had found a loophole, a way to bypass the deed and the will. Now, standing in my front yard with the damp night air clinging to my skin, I realized she had made her move. I forced myself to stop looking at the destruction and start looking at the absences. I waded back into the mess on the lawn. I needed to know exactly what she had taken. The anger was still there, boiling in my gut. But I pushed it down. Rage makes you sloppy. Rage makes you miss details. I needed to be cold. I checked the pile of books. My first editions were ruined, soaked through by the dew. But they were all there. I checked the jewelry box that had been dumped upside down near the mailbox. The costume jewelry was scattered, but the gold locket Grandpa gave me was missing. It was not valuable in terms of money, but it was leverage. Then I remembered the velvet box. I went back to it. It was a custom case for a Leica lens, a piece of glass worth more than my car. Gone. I moved to the scatter of papers near the driveway. This was where the real damage lay. The folder she had targeted was a thick cardstock accordion file where Grandpa kept his vital records. It held the original manuals for his vintage cameras, receipts from the 1970s, and a small, black leather notebook. That notebook was not just a diary, it was an inventory. Grandpa was paranoid about theft, so he wrote down the serial number of every single camera body and lens he owned. Without that notebook, proving ownership of the missing equipment would be a nightmare. She knew that. She knew exactly what to take to handicap my ability to fight back. But there was something she did not know. A memory surfaced, sharp and clear. It was from 2 weeks before Grandpa died. He was sitting in his armchair, his breathing shallow, his hands trembling as he cleaned a lens. He had called me over and gripped my wrist with surprising strength. He told me not to ignore the dark room in the basement. He said there was something there just in case. At the time, I thought it was just the rambling of a dying man. Or maybe he meant he had hidden some cash in an old film canister. I had never looked. The darkroom was a sacred space to him, and after he died, I could barely bring myself to go in there. It smelled too much like him, chemicals and old dust. It was too painful, but tonight, that pain was irrelevant. Just in case was not a throwaway phrase, it was a contingency plan. I looked at the house again. The dark windows stared back at me. Kendra had taken the notebook. She had taken the lens. She had tried to humiliate me by turning my front lawn into a landfill. She wanted me to call her. She wanted me to engage in a screaming match that she could record and use to prove I was unstable. She wanted to provoke a reaction that would violate some clause in a document I had not even seen yet. I would not give her that satisfaction. I stepped away from the mess. I did not pick anything up. If I cleaned it up, I was accepting the state of affairs. I was accepting the eviction. Instead, I treated the lawn like a crime scene. I left it exactly as it was. I would let the neighbors stare. I would let the homeowners association send me a fine. Every minute this mess sat here was evidence of her malice. I walked back to the front door, stepping over the gouges in the wood. I was not going to sleep. I was going to the basement. Kendra thought she was playing three-dimensional chess while I was playing checkers. She thought she had stripped me of my defenses, but she had forgotten who raised me. She had forgotten that I grew up watching a man who documented everything, who saw the world through a viewfinder, framing every moment for posterity. She had the law? Fine, I had the truth. And if Grandpa was right, I had the one thing that trumps a lie on a piece of paper. I had the negative. I locked the door behind me again, checking the chair I had wedged under the handle. I turned off the hallway lights so the house would look dark from the street, if she was watching, or if she had friends watching. Let them think I had gone to bed in tears. Let them think I was defeated. I walked to the narrow door under the staircase that led down to the dark room. The air grew cooler as I descended the wooden steps. The smell hit me immediately. Acetic acid, fixer, and the damp, earthy scent of the underground. It was the smell of secrets. I reached for the pull string of the overhead bulb, but then stopped. No lights. If there were windows down here, even small ones, light would give me away. I pulled my phone out and used the flashlight, keeping the beam low, aimed at the floor. I was done being the victim. I was done being the little sister who got the house because Grandpa pitied her. I was the owner of this property. I was the custodian of this legacy. And I was about to find out exactly what Grandpa meant by just in case. I pushed open the door to the dark room. The heavy wooden door to the dark room groaned as I pushed it open, the sound echoing like a warning in the stillness of the basement. I stepped across the threshold, and the smell hit me instantly. It was a pungent, acidic cocktail of fixer, stop bath, and aged dust, layered over the damp, earthy scent of subterranean concrete. It was the olfactory signature of my childhood, a sensory trigger that usually brought comfort, but tonight it felt like walking into a mausoleum. I swept my phone's flashlight beam across the room. It was exactly as Grandpa had left it. The enlarger stood like a skeletal microscope on the central table, covered in a fine layer of gray dust. Measuring beakers were stacked in a pyramid near the sink, and drying lines strung with clips crisscrossed the ceiling like spider webs. Along the far wall, sturdy wooden shelves groaned under the weight of his collection. Grandpa Everett had been obsessed with cameras, not just taking photos, but the machines themselves. There were dozens of them lining the shelves, twin-lens reflexes with their dual eyes, bulky medium-format boxes, and sleek rangefinders from the 1950s. They sat in rigid formation, a silent audience in the dark. Just in case, I whispered to myself, repeating his final instruction. I moved toward the shelves. What was I looking for? A safe? A hidden latch? I ran my hand along the wood of the shelving unit, checking for loose boards or hollow sounds. Nothing. I began to inspect the cameras themselves. I picked up a heavy medium-format body, checking the film compartment. Empty. I checked the battery housing. Corroded. I moved down the line, my frustration mounting. Maybe I had imagined the urgency in his voice. Maybe the darkroom just meant he had left cash in a coffee can somewhere behind the chemicals. Then, my hand brushed against a large, twin-lens camera sitting innocuously between two others on the middle shelf. It was warm. I froze. The basement was 58 degrees Fahrenheit. The metal of the other cameras was ice cold to the touch. But this one, a clunky model with a black matte finish, hummed with a faint, almost imperceptible vibration. It was radiating a low, steady heat from the back panel. I knelt, bringing my face level with the shelf. I shone my light behind the camera. It was not just sitting on the wood. A thick black cable, expertly painted to blend in with the shadows of the shelf, ran out of the back of the camera body and disappeared directly into a small gap in the paneling behind it. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was not a camera. It was a housing. I gripped the edge of the wood paneling where the cable vanished and pulled. It gave way with a magnetic thunk. The panel was a false front. Behind it, nestled in a cutout within the drywall, was a small, sleek metal box. Rows of tiny green and red LED lights blinked in a rhythmic, silent language. It was a digital video recorder, a high-end surveillance hub, but it had been stripped of its plastic casing to fit into the wall cavity. Grandpa had not just been paranoid, he had been an engineer of his own security. He had gutted his beloved vintage cameras, replacing their internal mirrors and shutters with high-definition digital lenses, then wired them all back to this central brain. He had turned his hobby into a fortress. I found a small, wireless mouse and a portable monitor tucked into a majestic cigar box on the shelf below. I plugged the monitor into the DVR unit. The screen flickered to life. A grid of 6 grayscale images popped up, crisp and clear even in the low light. My breath caught in my throat. Camera 1, the front porch, looking down from the eaves. Camera 2, the main hallway, wide angle. Camera 3, the kitchen, capturing the back door and the utility cabinet. Camera 4, the living room, covering the seating area and the front entrance. Camera 5, the side door, an angle I did not even know existed, hidden likely in the birdhouse outside. Camera 6, the basement stairs. The timestamp in the corner of every feed marched forward, counting seconds. He had never stopped watching, even in death. Grandpa was the sentinel of this house. I grabbed the mouse, my hand trembling. I navigated the menu. The interface was utilitarian, functional. I clicked on search and scrolled the date back to yesterday. I selected the feed for the front porch. I dragged the timeline cursor to late afternoon. On the screen, the sun was setting. The porch was empty. Then, at 4:17 in the afternoon, a figure walked into the frame. They were wearing a dark, oversized raincoat and a baseball cap pulled low. They moved with a strange mix of purpose and hesitation. I watched as the figure approached the front door. They looked over their shoulder at the street, then pulled a tool from their pocket, a screwdriver. I watched in silence as the figure jammed the screwdriver into the wood surrounding the lock. They raked it across the metal plate, gouging the paint. They struck the handle. It was a performance. They were manufacturing the evidence of a break-in. After 2 minutes of this pantomime, the figure stopped. They put the screwdriver away. Then, with a smooth, practiced motion, they reached into their other pocket and pulled out a key. They slid it into the lock. It turned effortlessly. The door opened. The figure stepped into the hallway. I switched to camera 2. Inside the house, the figure paused. They reached up and pulled off the baseball cap. Long, blonde hair tumbled down. The figure turned, looking directly up at the ceiling, checking for what I assumed they thought were standard motion sensors. It was Kendra, seeing her face on that screen, stripped of her usual composed mask, was like taking a physical blow to the stomach. Her expression was not fearful, it was smug. She looked like a predator who had just found an unlocked coop. But as I watched, something happened that made my blood turn to ice. Kendra did not close the door immediately. She held it open. She turned back to the porch and waved. I switched back to camera 1. Another figure stepped into the frame. This person did not enter the house. They stayed on the porch, leaning against the railing, just out of the line of sight from the street. It was a man. He was tall, wearing a structured wool coat. He did not look like a laborer or a mover. He looked like a professional. He was holding a clipboard or a tablet. He pointed at the door, then gestured toward the living room, giving Kendra instructions. He was directing her. "Move the boxes," he seemed to mouth. "Check the desk." Kendra nodded and disappeared inside. The man stayed outside, checking his watch, scanning the neighborhood. He was the lookout. He was the architect. I stared at the screen. Kendra was vindictive. Yes, she was greedy. But she was also chaotic. This level of precision, this staged break-in, the timing with the inheritance papers, this was not just a sisterly grudge. This was a professional operation. Someone was guiding her. Someone knew exactly how to dismantle my life legally and physically. I needed this footage. I needed it safe. I pulled a portable hard drive from my bag. I never traveled without one for work, and plugged it into the DVR's USB port. I initiated a full export of the last 48 hours. The progress bar crawled across the screen. 10%. I could not risk a technical failure. I could not risk a corrupt file. I unlocked my phone and switched to video mode again. I held the phone steady, framing the monitor. "I am recording a playback of surveillance footage from the master system in the basement," I narrated, keeping my voice flat and monotone. "Date of recording is February 8th. Time of incident is 16:19 hours. I recorded the screen as the video played. I recorded Kendra's face. I recorded the key. I recorded the man on the porch. I zoomed in on his face, trying to capture his features, though the resolution on the outdoor camera was slightly grainy. I recorded the timestamps. This was crucial. In court, digital files can be challenged. Lawyers claim they are deep fakes or edited. But a video of a video, recorded in real time with my voice narration and the ambient sound of the basement, created a chain of custody that was much harder to break. It proved that this footage existed here, now, on this specific device. The hard drive beeped. Export complete. I ejected the drive and put it in my bra. It was the safest place I could think of. Then I logged into my encrypted cloud storage on my phone and started uploading the video I had just taken with my camera. I watched the blue upload bar inch forward, 50%. I looked back at the screen. Inside the house, on the recorded feed, Kendra was now in the kitchen. She was opening the utility drawer. She was taking the tools. She was dismantling the house piece by piece, 75%. She looked so confident. She moved with the arrogance of someone who believes they are the only player on the board. She thought the house was empty. She thought the walls were just walls. Upload complete. I sat back on my heels, the adrenaline shaking my hands. I had the gun. Now I just needed to wait for her to walk in front of the bullet. I sat in the darkroom, the glow of the monitor painting my face in spectral blue light, and watched the narrative of the break-in shift from a crime of passion to something far more calculated. What I was witnessing on the screen was not a sister lashing out. It was a liquidation. I switched the feed to the living room camera. The timestamp read 4:22 in the afternoon. Kendra did not stomp around. She did not throw things immediately. She walked into the center of the room and stood there, pivoting slowly on her heels. Her posture was erect, almost regal. She looked at the crown molding. She looked at the hardwood floors. Then, a smile spread across her face. It was not the manic grin of someone enjoying revenge. It was the satisfied, predatory smile of a farmer looking at a crop that was finally ready for harvest. She pulled her phone out of her pocket. For a moment, I thought she was going to call someone, perhaps me, to gloat, but she did not dial. She raised the phone and stepped back into the corner of the room. She held the device horizontally. Click. She moved to the hallway. She framed the shot to emphasize the length of the corridor and the natural light flooding in from the kitchen. Click. My stomach churned as I realized what she was doing. She was not documenting the mess she intended to make. She was taking listing photos. She was capturing the before shots of a property she intended to put on the market. She zoomed in on the updated electrical outlets I had installed last year. She took a close-up of the bay window seat. These were appraisal shots. She was building a portfolio for a sale. I watched her move into the kitchen. She went straight to the cabinet above the refrigerator. Grandpa used to hide his emergency cash there in an old coffee tin. I had moved it months ago, depositing the money into the estate account. But Kendra did not know that. She stood on her tiptoes, opening the cabinet door. She reached in, her hands sweeping the empty space. When she pulled her hand back, her face twisted in a scowl. It was a momentary crack in her composure. She slammed the cabinet door shut, the vibration shuddering through the grainy video feed. She was looking for liquid assets, anything she could grab immediately to fund whatever operation she was running. Then, movement on the side door camera caught my eye. I clicked over to camera 5. The man in the wool coat was there again. He had moved from the front porch to the side entrance, which was shielded from the street by a tall hedge. He was no longer just a lookout. He was an active participant. He tapped on the glass. Kendra appeared in the frame a few seconds later, unlocking the side door from the inside. She opened it just a crack. They did not hug. They did not exchange pleasantries. The man reached into his coat and pulled out a thick, clipped stack of documents. The papers were legal size, blue-backed, the kind used for formal filings. He handed them to her. Then he leaned in. Speaking urgently, Grandpa's surveillance system was sophisticated, but the microphones were hidden inside the house, not outside. However, the side door was open, and the microphone in the kitchen, camera 3, was sensitive. I cranked the volume on the monitor up to the maximum. Static hissed through the speakers. Then, the sound of a car passing by outside. Then, faintly, the man's voice cut through. "Form," he said. The audio crackled. Then, clearer. "Notary, today," Kendra nodded, her face serious. She took the papers and shut the door, locking it immediately. I switched back to the interior view. Kendra walked to the dining room table where my inheritance files were stacked. She placed the new papers down next to my existing binder. She opened her handbag and pulled out a pair of latex gloves. My breath hitched. She was wearing gloves now. She knew she was about to touch the official records. She opened my binder. She flipped through the pages with a speed that suggested she knew exactly what she was looking for. She stopped at the section marked Estate Authority. She compared the document in my binder with the one the man had given her. She held them side by side, reading the headers. Then, with a sharp, violent yank, she ripped my copy of The Durable Power of Attorney out of the binder. She crumpled it into a ball and shoved it into her pocket. Then she took the document the man had given her, the blue-backed one, and slid it into the plastic sleeve where mine had been. It was a swap. She was not just destroying evidence, she was planting a forgery. She was replacing the legitimate chain of command with her own. I watched, mesmerized by the audacity of it. After the paperwork was done, the physical destruction began. But even that was calculated. I watched the porch camera feed again. Kendra began hauling my belongings out the front door, but she did not just grab the nearest items. She started with the bulky things. My suitcases, the boxes of winter clothes, the kitchen chairs. She piled them near the street. Why? Because they took up space. They created a visual barrier. From the road, it would look like someone was moving out, or perhaps being evicted. It created a narrative for the neighbors. Chloe is leaving. Then came the second wave of trash, the sentimental items, Grandpa's photo albums, my college diploma, the velvet camera case. She threw these on top of the pile, face open. This was the psychological warfare. She wanted me to come home and see my memories rotting in the grass. She wanted me broken so I would not look too closely at the paperwork she had swapped. The climax of the performance came at the very end of the recording. Kendra stood in the foyer, dusting her hands off. She looked around the empty living room, checking her work. She pulled her phone out again. The screen lit up, illuminating her face in the darkening hallway. She tapped the screen to answer a call. I zoomed in on the video. The resolution was high enough that when she held the phone up to her ear, the screen remained visible for a split second before it went dark. The caller ID flashed in white letters against a black background. It said, "Closing desk." My blood ran cold. Closing desk is industry shorthand for a title company or a real estate attorney's finalization department. You do not talk to the closing desk unless a deal is done, unless the money is in escrow, and the keys are about to change hands. Kendra listened for a moment. Then she spoke. She was facing camera 2 directly, though she did not know it. Her lips moved clearly, and the microphone in the hallway picked up every syllable. 2:15, she said. Her voice was steady, devoid of the earlier anger. Done is done. She hung up. She looked at the front door, then turned and walked out, leaving my life scattered on the lawn behind her. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the basement pressing in on me. 2:15. I looked at the date on the recording. It was yesterday. But closing desk implies a business day transaction, if she was speaking to them at 4:30 in the afternoon. The 2:15 deadline could not have been for that same day. Banks close at 5. Title companies stop recording deeds by 4. 2:15 meant tomorrow. Which, because I was watching this after midnight, meant today. Kendra had not just broken in to mess with my head. She had staged a scene to keep me occupied while she executed a sale she had no right to make. She had swapped the power of attorney to give herself the legal standing to sign on my behalf. The man outside was likely the notary or the broker, facilitating the fraud. They were going to sell my house at 2:15 this afternoon. I looked at my watch. It was just past 1 in the morning. I had less than 13 hours to stop a sale that was already in the final stages of execution. I ejected the hard drive. I unplugged the monitor. I put the false panel back on the wall, hiding the blinking DVR. I grabbed the old camera I had come down here to find, the one Grandpa had pointed me toward, and climbed the stairs. The fear was gone. The sadness was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard logic of risk management. Kendra wanted to use the law to take this house? Fine. I was about to introduce her to the kind of law she had obviously forgotten exists. The kind that puts people in handcuffs. I did not sleep. Sleep is a luxury for people who still own their homes, and as of right now, my ownership was dangling by a thread of bureaucratic spiderweb. Instead of resting, I made 3 phone calls. They were not dramatic. They were not tearful pleas for help. They were dull, administrative, and expensive. And they were the only things standing between me and losing everything. The first call was to an emergency locksmith service at 4 in the morning. When the van pulled up, the sky was just beginning to bruise with purple light. The locksmith was a burly man named Dave who smelled of coffee and stale tobacco. He took one look at the gouges on the front door and let out a low whistle. Someone really wanted in, he said, kneeling to inspect the strike plate. They had a key, I corrected him, holding up my phone to record his hands as he worked. The damage was cosmetic, a performance. Please drill out the cylinder and replace it with a commercial-grade deadbolt. I also want a secondary heavy-duty sash jammer installed on the interior. I filmed the entire process. I filmed the metal shavings curling onto the doormat as he drilled. I filmed the old lock, the one Kendra had opened so easily, falling onto the floor. This was not just a repair. It was evidence of the breach being sealed. When he handed me the invoice, I paid the exorbitant emergency fee without blinking. It was a line item in the cost of defense. The second call was to the non-emergency police line. I am reporting a breaking and entering, theft of property, and criminal damage to a residence, I said into the receiver. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that wanted to be there. The dispatcher tried to categorize it. Is the intruder still there, ma'am? No, but I have high-definition video and audio of the intruder identifying herself and stating her intent to liquidate the property. I also have footage of an accomplice. That word, accomplice, changed the tone of the dispatch. It moved the needle from civil dispute to criminal conspiracy. By the time the patrol car rolled up to the curb, the sun was fully up. The officers looked bored at first, expecting a hysterical homeowner crying about a stolen television, but then Detective Rowan Pierce arrived in an unmarked sedan. She was a sharp-featured woman with tired eyes and a suit that looked like it had seen too many courtrooms. She stood in my living room, looking at the mess Kendra had left, her notebook closed. So, she said, her tone skeptical, your sister broke in. Sounds like a civil matter. Ms. Thomas, usually, we tell family members to work it out in probate court. I did not argue. I did not try to explain the toxicity of our relationship or the history of Grandpa's will. Arguments are emotional, evidence is factual. I pulled out my tablet and placed it on the coffee table. I navigated to the clip I had uploaded to the cloud, the one from the basement. "Watch," I said. I played the footage of Kendra using the key. Then I skipped forward to the kitchen scene, showing her swapping the files in my binder. Finally, I played the audio from the hallway. 2:15. Done is done. Detective Pierce watched the screen without blinking. When the clip ended, she didn't look bored anymore. She looked like a hunter who had just caught a scent. "Play that last part again," she commanded. I replayed it. 2:15. "That is not a family argument," Pierce said, opening her notebook. She clicked her pen. "That is a closing deadline. She is moving against the title." "She swapped my power of attorney," I said, pointing to the binder on the dining table which I had not touched since discovering the swap. "She replaced my valid copy with a forgery. She took the original certified inheritance certificate, Grandpa's inventory logbook, and a velvet camera case that is supposed to hold a lens worth $5,000. Pierce looked up. "High-value theft, fraud, burglary. And who is the guy?" "I do not know," I said. "He stood at the side door. He gave her the papers." Pierce walked to the side door. Inspecting the lock, I had just had Dave reinforce. "Accomplice. That bumps this up. If she was alone, her lawyer could plead diminished capacity or emotional distress. But if she has a partner, it is organized." She turned back to me. "Check your safe. If they were looking for papers, they would have hit the master storage." I led her to the small wall safe in the study. My hands were steady as I dialed the combination. The door swung open. "The cash is still here," I said, pointing to the envelope of emergency money. "But look at the accordion file." The tabs on the file folders were bent backward. The papers inside were ruffled, not sitting flush against the bottom. Someone had riffled through them violently, searching for something specific. "They did not want money," I said, realizing the full scope of the danger. "They wanted the deed, or the survey maps, anything to expedite a transfer." "She is trying to sell it out from under you," Pierce said, "but she cannot just sell a house in a day without triggering a notice." "Unless she changed the contact info," I said. The thought hit me like a physical blow. I rushed to my laptop and opened the county tax assessor's portal. My fingers flew across the keys as I logged into the homeowner dashboard. There it was, a pending request, filed yesterday electronically, change of address for tax notices. The new address was a post office box in a neighboring district. "She redirected the mail," I said, turning the screen so Pierce could see. "Any fraud alerts, any sale confirmations, any lien notices, they would all go to her, not me. I would not know the house was sold until the new owner showed up with a moving truck." Pierce stared at the screen. The boredom was completely gone now. She pulled out her phone and dialed a number, holding up a hand to silence me. "This is Pierce," she said into the phone. "I need a rush on a suspect ID, Kendra Thomas. Also, check for any real estate filings flagged for this afternoon in the county clerk's queue. Yes, it is urgent." She hung up and looked at me. Her expression was grim. "You said the deadline was 2:15? She asked. "Yes, that is what she said on the phone." "It is 9 o'clock now," Pierce said. "If there is a file sitting on a desk somewhere waiting for a stamp, or a digital packet waiting for a final notary seal, we do not have days, we have hours." She looked at the mess on the floor, then back at me. "This is not just a break-in anymore, Chloe. This is an active theft in progress. The house is the stolen goods, and she is currently in the getaway car." "What do we do?" I asked. "We find out where she is closing," Pierce said. "And we stop the pen from hitting the paper." She tapped her pen against the notebook. "Did you recognize the voice on the other end of her call, or see the number?" "It said closing desk," I replied. "But I did not see the number. It flashed too fast." "Closing desk," Pierce repeated. "Generic. But she mentioned a notary." "The man at the door," I said. "He said, notary today." Pierce nodded. "If they are doing this electronically, They are using an e-notary service to bypass the physical presence requirement. It is faster, harder to trace, and perfect for fraud. I looked at the clock on the wall. The second hand swept past the 12. Every tick felt like a countdown. I had secured the doors, I had called the police, but none of that mattered if Kendra signed a digital deed in 5 hours. I need to go to the recorder's office, I said, grabbing my car keys. I need to file an affidavit of forgery before 2:15. I will meet you there, Pierce said. I am going to run the plate on the car from your video if we can get a clean angle. Go. And Chloe? I stopped at the door. Do not call her, Pierce warned. If she knows we are on to her, she will accelerate the timeline. Let her think she has won until we walk through the door. She thinks I am still crying over my broken vase, I said cold. She has no idea I am coming for her. I stepped out into the morning light. The locksmith's van was gone. The neighbors were still peeking through their blinds. Let them look. By the end of the day, they would have a hell of a story to tell, but it would not be the one Kendra wrote for them. The fluorescent lights of the county recorder's office hummed with a low, headache-inducing buzz that seemed to vibrate against my temples. I stood at the counter, my knuckles white as I gripped the granite edge. The room smelled of floor wax and stale coffee, a scent that usually signaled bureaucratic boredom. But today it smelled like a trap closing in. On the wall behind the clerk, a round analog clock ticked loudly. Tick, tick, tick. It was 10:30 in the morning. I had the case number from Detective Pierce scribbled on a yellow sticky note stuck to the back of my phone. I need to check the index for my property, I told the clerk. He was a man in his 50s with thick glasses and a slow, deliberate way of typing that made me want to scream. Address is 412 Maplewood Drive. Last name Thomas. Identification? He asked, not looking up. I slid my driver's license across the counter. He took it, looked at the photo, looked at me, and then turned back to his screen. His fingers pecked at the keyboard. Key, pause, key, pause. Nothing has been recorded today, he said, reaching for his coffee mug. Check yesterday, I said, my voice tight. Check for pending filings, please, he sighed, the sound of a man who hated interruptions to his routine, and hit the enter key again. He squinted at the screen, then he stopped chewing his gum. Oh, he said. That single syllable dropped into the silence like a stone. What is it? I asked, leaning forward. There is a new document recorded yesterday afternoon, he said, turning the monitor slightly so I could see, but not enough to read the fine print. A durable power of attorney. My stomach dropped. A power of attorney, or POA, gives someone the legal right to act on your behalf, to sign checks, to sell assets, to destroy a life. Show me, I demanded. He printed a copy. The printer whirred and spat out 3 pages. I snatched them up before they even hit the tray. It was there in black and white. Grantor. Chloe Thomas. Grantee. Kendra Thomas. I scanned the text, my eyes racing over the legal boilerplate until I hit a paragraph that made the breath catch in my throat. It was the inciting clause. Due to the grantor's intermittent incapacity to manage financial affairs and potential medical instability, this power of attorney is effective immediately in capacity. She had not just forged my signature, she had enshrined a lie in the public record. She was claiming I was crazy. She was claiming I was unfit. That was her narrative. If I fought back, she would point to this document and say, "See, poor Chloe does not know what she is doing. She is unstable." It was a preemptive strike against my credibility. "This is a forgery," I said, my voice trembling with cold rage. "I did not sign this. It is notarized," the clerk said, pointing to a stamp on the last page. "Looks standard." "Is there anything else?" I asked, ignoring him. "Is there a deed?" "Not recorded yet," he said. He clicked another tab. "Wait. There is a pending batch upload in the queue. It is flagged as urgent." He looked at me with genuine concern now. "It is a quitclaim deed, transferring title from Chloe Thomas to Kendra Thomas. Consideration is $10. $10? She was stealing a $500,000 home for the price of a sandwich. When does it record? I asked. The clerk checked the metadata. It is in a holding pattern for final fund verification. Scheduled for release at 2:15 p.m. 2:15. The number from the video, the number on the phone call, it was real. It was not a code. It was a timestamp on a server. Who submitted it? I asked. A third-party vendor. He read from the screen. Pinevale Closing Services. They are an e-recording agent. I had never heard of them. It sounded like a shell company, or a high-volume processing mill that did not ask too many questions as long as the fees were paid. Stop it, I said. You have to stop it. I cannot just delete a file, ma'am, the clerk said, retreating into his bureaucratic shell. If the paperwork is in order. It is not in order, I snapped. It is fraud. I am the owner. I am standing right here telling you I am not selling my house. I pulled out a pen and a legal pad from my bag. My compliance training took over. I knew I could not argue with emotions. I had to argue with paper. I am filing an affidavit of forgery and a notice of contest, I said, writing furiously. I am declaring that the signature on that power of attorney is unauthorized. I want you to flag the property index. I want a cloud on title entered immediately. If that deed records at 2:15, the county is complicit in a felony. The clerk looked terrified. He hit a button under his desk. A moment later, Detective Pierce walked through the double doors. She had been parking the car, but she must have sensed the escalation. She flashed her badge at the clerk. Detective Rowan Pierce, property crimes, she said. We have an active investigation regarding this parcel. What do you have? The clerk stammered, pointing at the screen. Pending transfer, Pinevale Closing Services. Pierce pulled out her phone. I need the transaction ID, she said to the clerk, and the IP address of the uploader if you have it. She looked at me. Pinevale. I know them. They are a volume shop. They do remote closings. Fast, cheap, and loose with the rules. She is using them to bypass a physical meeting, I said, handing my handwritten affidavit to the clerk to stamp. She knows if she walked into a title office here, someone might recognize me or realize she is not me. The clerk took my affidavit. He stamped it with a heavy thud. Received. I can flag the file, the clerk said, his hands shaking slightly. But if the system is automated, the release might happen unless Pinevale cancels the request from their end. The servers are synchronized. Then we need to get to Pinevale, Pierce said. Where are they based? They have a satellite office in the business park off the highway, the clerk said. But most of their agents work remotely. Wait, I said, a thought striking me. You said the power of attorney was notarized, but I was in Chicago. The clerk looked at the digital file again. It says remote online notarization under the stamp. Virginia statute allows for audio-video communication acts. Pierce and I looked at each other. The air in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Remote online notarization meant there was a video session. It meant that in order to get that stamp, someone had to sit in front of a webcam and pretend to be me. They had to hold up a fake ID to the camera. They had to answer questions. If it was online, Pierce said, a shark-like grin forming on her face, then there is a recording of the session. And if Kendra is the one who set it up, I added, she either hired an actor or she did it herself. If she did it herself, Pierce said, she would have needed a wig and a fake ID with your name, but her photo... Pinevale will have the video, the clerk offered helpfully. They are required by law to store the session for 10 years. I looked at the clock. 11:15. We had 3 hours before the system automatically pushed the deed through. We are not just going to stop the sale, Pierce said, turning on her heel. We are going to catch her in the act of impersonation. She used a service called Pinevale, I said, following Pierce toward the exit. She thinks the digital wall protects her. She thinks because it is online, it is invisible. She forgot one thing, Pierce said, pushing open the heavy glass doors to the parking lot. Online leaves a bigger footprint than paper. I clutched the stamped copy of my affidavit. We had the fraud alert. We had the police report, and now we knew the mechanism. Kendra had built a trap out of digital paperwork, but she had locked herself inside it. "I want to be there," I said as we reached the car. "When you walk into Pinevale, I want to be there." "You will be," Pierce said, unlocking the doors. "But you stay in the car until I say so. If she is meeting someone from Pinevale today to finalize the urgent transfer, that is where she will be." I got into the passenger seat. My phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank app. Low balance alert. I checked the account. It was not zero, but it was close. Kendra was not just taking the house. She was draining the liquidity to pay for the closing costs. She was using my own money to steal my own life. "Drive," I said. "Fast." "Do not touch your phone," Detective Pierce said. Her voice was low and hard, cutting through the silence of the unmarked sedan. "Do not answer her calls. Do not read her texts. Do not block her. Just let it stack up." We were parked across the street from a nondescript office park that looked like every other tax shelter in the suburbs. Beige stucco, tinted glass, and a sign that listed 20 different companies, most of which probably only existed on a server somewhere. Pinevale Closing Services was Suite B4. "She is baiting you," Pierce continued, her eyes scanning the parking lot. "She wants you to send an angry text. She wants you to threaten her. The moment you do that, she shows it to the notary or the police and says she feels unsafe. Then she gets an emergency restraining order, and you get removed from the equation while she signs the deed." My phone buzzed against my thigh. It was a phantom sensation, sharp and electric. I pulled it out slowly, keeping it below the dashboard line. It was Kendra. "If you show up, you're only going to embarrass yourself. Go home. Chloe." I stared at the words. She was not asking where I was. She was assuming I was already on my way, frantic and hysterical. She was pre-writing the script where she was the composed older sister, and I was the chaotic mess, causing a scene at a place of business. I did not type a reply. I took a screenshot. I forwarded the image to Pierce's work email. "Received," Pierce said, checking her watch. "She is trying to flush you out. Stay still." I gripped the steering wheel of my own car, which I had parked 2 rows back from the entrance. Pierce was in the sedan next to me. My hands were freezing. The heater was off to save gas and keep the engine silent. I felt like a sniper. But my weapon was silence. The dashboard clock flipped to 2:07. A silver luxury SUV turned into the lot. I knew that car. It was a lease Kendra could barely afford, kept specifically for appearances. She parked right in front of the glass doors of Pinevale. She stepped out. She was wearing a navy blue blazer over a cream blouse, tailored trousers, and heels that clicked with authority on the pavement. She carried a thick leather folder tucked under her arm. She did not look like a thief. She looked like a woman who had just won a difficult merger. She checked her reflection in the car window, smoothed her hair, and walked into the building with her chin up. "Subject 1 on site," Pierce whispered into her radio. I watched Kendra disappear through the tinted doors. She was walking into her own trap, but she walked with such confidence that for a second, I felt a flicker of doubt. Did she know something I did not? Was there another loop in the knot I had missed? 2:10. A dark sedan pulled up next to Kendra's SUV. The driver door opened, and a man stepped out. It was him. The man from the side door video. The man in the wool coat. He was carrying a black laptop bag and a small, heavy-looking case that I recognized immediately. It was a notary seal kit. He was not an employee of Pinevale. He was a mobile notary, likely one Kendra had handpicked, someone willing to stamp a document without asking why the signer looked different in person than on the ID. He hurried inside, checking his watch. They were cutting it close. The deadline was 2:15. They had 5 minutes to finalize the upload and get the county clerk's server to accept the transfer. "Subject 2 on site," Pierce said. "All units, hold, let them sit down, let them open the laptop. I want them mid-transaction." 212. The street was quiet. Then, without sirens, without flashing lights, 2 police cruisers rolled into the parking lot from opposite entrances. They moved slowly, boxing in the silver SUV and the dark sedan. Pierce opened her car door. She signaled to me. "Stay behind me. Do not speak unless I ask you a direct question." We walked across the asphalt. The air was crisp, biting. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic rhythm that seemed too loud for the quiet afternoon. Pierce pushed open the door to Pinevale Closing Services. It was a small, sterile reception area, cheap abstract art on the walls, a water cooler, and through the glass wall of the conference room straight ahead. I saw them. Kendra was sitting at the head of a mahogany table. The man was setting up his laptop, plugging in a digital signature pad. A Pinevale employee, a young woman who looked bored, was standing by a printer. Pierce did not knock. She opened the glass door and stepped inside. "Police," she announced. Her voice was not loud, but it filled the room instantly. Nobody touched the computer. Kendra jumped. Her hand flew to her chest. The man froze, his hand hovering over the notary stamp. "Excuse me?" Kendra stood up, her face flushing with indignant anger. "This is a private closing. You cannot just barge in here." Then she saw me standing in the doorway behind Pierce. Her eyes narrowed. The shock vanished, replaced instantly by a look of pitying exhaustion. She turned to the Pinevale employee. "I am so sorry," Kendra said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper. "This is my sister. She is having a very hard time with our grandfather's passing. She has been stalking me." She looked at Pierce. "Officer, I have texts proving harassment. I need you to remove her. We are in the middle of a time-sensitive legal transaction." It was a brilliant performance. If I had been alone, if I had been screaming, it might have worked. But Pierce did not look at me. She looked at the laptop screen. "I am not here for a domestic dispute," Pierce said, placing her hand on the open laptop, preventing the man from closing it. "I am here for a fraud investigation. Detective Rowan Pierce. Financial crimes." She turned to the man. "Close that session. If you hit enter, you are committing a felony in front of a police officer." The man pulled his hands back as if the keyboard were red hot. "I need the transaction file," Pierce said, rattling off demands like machine gun fire. "I need the ID verification logs. I need the upload history. I need the digital certificate for the notary session." Kendra tried to step between Pierce and the table. "This is ridiculous. I have power of attorney. It is on file. My sister is mentally unwell. She does not know what she is saying." "The power of attorney that was notarized yesterday?" Pierce asked. "Yes," Kendra said, lifting her chin. "Everything is legal. We used a remote online notarization service. It is fully compliant with state law." Pierce smiled. It was a cold, sharp smile that did not reach her eyes. "Remote online notarization," Pierce repeated. "That requires an audio-video recording of the principal signer. That would be Chloe Thomas." Pierce stepped aside and pointed at me. "That is Chloe Thomas," Pierce said. "She was in Chicago yesterday. We have her flight records. We have her hotel receipts. And we have her standing right here." Kendra's face went pale. The confidence cracked. "So," Pierce continued, leaning over the table, getting right in Kendra's face, "if Chloe was in Chicago, who is in the video? Kendra? Do you have the video of Chloe signing the POA?" The room went dead silent. The man with the laptop looked down at his shoes. Kendra opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked at the laptop, then at me, her eyes darting around for an exit. "Well," Pierce pressed, "show me the video. It is required by law to be saved in the session log. Play it." The Pinevale employee, the young woman who had been standing by the printer, cleared her throat. She looked terrified. She stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Actually, Detective," she said, her voice trembling, "there is a flag on the file." "What kind of flag?" Pierce asked, not taking her eyes off Kendra. "The notarization session from yesterday," the employee said, tapping the screen. The system marked it as incomplete verification. Kendra spun around. What? You said it went through. The camera angle, the employee whispered. Looking at the floor, the participant's face was partially obscured by a glare. The AI verification flagged it as a potential mismatch. But the notary overrode the warning manually. You overrode the warning? Pierce looked at the man in the wool coat. She told me it was a bad internet connection, the man stammered, pointing at Kendra. She said her sister was camera shy. So there is a video, Pierce said, but it is blurry, and you pushed it through anyway. It was a glitch, Kendra shouted, her voice rising an octave. It was just a technical glitch. The sun was in the window. A glitch, Pierce said, straightening up. Interesting. Because usually, when there is a glitch, people do not override security protocols to sell a house in under 24 hours. I watched Kendra. She was crumbling. The glitch was the loose thread. She had tried to fake the video, maybe wearing a wig, maybe using a deep fake filter, but she had not been able to get it perfect. So she had bullied or bribed the notary to ignore the warning. She thought the digital world would hide her. Instead, it had just recorded her error. Seize the laptop, Pierce ordered the uniformed officers who had entered the room. Seize the notary seal, and secure that server log. Kendra looked at me. For the first time, there was no smugness, no pity, just pure, unadulterated fear. Chloe, she said, her voice shaking. Tell them this is just a family thing. We can fix this. I looked at her. I looked at the folder on the table that contained the deed to my house. I looked at the man she had hired to help her steal it. You are right, Kendra, I said quietly. It is a family thing. Grandpa warned me about you. I turned to Pierce. I want to press charges. The air in the conference room shifted instantly. The moment I said I wanted to press charges, Kendra stopped looking like a concerned sister and started looking like a cornered animal. She knew the emotional angle had failed. The grieving sister act had dissolved. The second Detective Pierce brought up the flight records. So, Kendra did what she always did when she was losing a game. She tried to flip the board. She took a step back, clutching her designer handbag against her chest as if it were a shield. She turned her gaze from me to the detective, her eyes narrowing with malicious intent. You want to talk about laws? Kendra spat, her voice rising. You want to talk about privacy? Ask her how she got that footage of me. She pointed a manicured finger at me. She has cameras hidden all over that house, inside the walls, inside the furniture. She records everything. That is illegal surveillance. She is a voyeur. She has been spying on the family for years. It was a desperate pivot. She was trying to make the fruit of the poisonous tree argument, implying that my evidence was obtained illegally and therefore inadmissible. She wanted to turn the investigation onto me. Detective Pierce did not even blink. She kept her hand hovering near her holster, her posture relaxed but ready. Ms. Thomas, Pierce said, her voice dangerously calm. Chloe owns the property. In this state, a homeowner is legally permitted to install security cameras in common areas of their own residence. It is not a crime to secure your own living room. It is not security, Kendra shrieked, the veneer of the corporate professional cracking completely. It is perverse. Grandpa was obsessed with watching people, and she is just like him. Then she smiled. It was a small, cruel twitch of her lips that I recognized from our childhood. It was the look she gave right before she broke a toy I loved. Ask her what else is in that dark room, Kendra hissed, locking eyes with me. Ask her why the velvet box was empty, Chloe. You think I do not know what Grandpa kept down there? You think I do not know about the lenses? My breath hitched in my throat. The room seemed to tilt. For a second, I had thought her obsession was just the house, the real estate value, the land. But she had just shown her hand. She knew about the collection. The empty velvet box I had found on the lawn was not just trash she had tossed aside. It was a casing she had discarded because she had taken what was inside. She was not just trying to sell the building. She was trying to strip the legacy. She wanted the vintage Leicas, the rare glass, the things Grandpa had spent 50 years collecting. She wanted to liquidate his passion and turn it into a wire transfer. She thought mentioning the darkroom would shame me, or make me look like I was hiding something illicit. She did not realize she had just given me the motive for the grand larceny charge. Pierce seemed to catch the implication too. She looked at me, saw the realization on my face, and then turned back to Kendra with renewed intensity. "We will get to the inventory of stolen goods later," Pierce said, stepping into Kendra's personal space. "Right now, we are talking about forgery. You are detained. Ms. Thomas, do not leave this room." "You cannot detain me," Kendra snapped. "I have a flight to catch." "You are not going anywhere," Pierce said. She turned to the Pine Vale employee who was still holding the tablet. "Play the video, the one from the notarization session." Kendra froze. The man in the wool coat, the notary, suddenly looked very interested in the exit sign. He started to pack his laptop into his bag, his movements jerky and fast. "Sit down," a uniformed officer barked from the doorway, blocking the man's path. The notary sank back into his chair, looking defeated. The Pine Vale employee tapped the screen. She turned the tablet so Pierce and I could see. The video player loaded. It was a recording of a Zoom-style call. The interface showed the date. Yesterday. The time. 2:30 in the afternoon. On one side of the split screen was the notary, the man sitting right there in the room with us. On the other side was a woman. She was sitting in front of a blank white wall. She was wearing a high-necked sweater, likely to hide her neck. She was wearing large, dark-rimmed glasses that I did not own, and on her head was a wig. It was a bob cut, dark brown, meant to mimic my hair color. But it was stiff, synthetic. It sat too low on her forehead. The woman in the video looked at the camera and spoke. "My name is Chloe Thomas," she said. The voice was Kendra's. She was pitching it lower, trying to sound serious, trying to sound like me, but the cadence was unmistakable. It was the voice of someone who thought they were smarter than the machine recording them. I stared at the screen. It was almost comical in its audacity. She looked like a bad caricature of me. The lighting was blown out, the contrast turned up high, likely a deliberate attempt to obscure the features. That was the glitch the employee had mentioned. The system had struggled to map the biometric points of her face because she was hiding behind layers of deception. "That is not Chloe Thomas," Pierce said, her voice flat. "That is a woman in a wig committing identity theft." Kendra let out a strangled sound. She lunged toward the tablet as if she could physically snatch the digital file out of existence. "It was just a procedure," she blurted out. The room went silent. The words hung in the air, heavy and irreversible. "Excuse me?" Pierce said, turning slowly to face her. Kendra's eyes were wide, panic flooding out the arrogance. She realized too late what she had said. She tried to backtrack, her hands fluttering in front of her. "I mean, the system was down. Chloe could not log in. We just needed to get the paperwork filed before the rate lock expired. It was just a technicality. It was just for speed." "A technicality?" Pierce repeated. "You impersonated the homeowner to sign a power of attorney granting yourself total control over her assets because you wanted to do it fast?" "She would have signed it anyway," Kendra shouted, pointing at me again. "She owes me. That house should have been mine. I am the oldest. It is just a piece of paper." "It is a felony," Pierce corrected her. "Actually, it is several felonies: identity theft, forgery, wire fraud, and since you used an interstate internet connection to do it, the feds might want a piece of this too." The man in the wool coat stood up again. "I did not know," he said, his voice high and thin. "She told me it was her sister. She showed me an ID." "Sit down," Pierce yelled. "You overrode the security flag. You are an accessory. You are looking at losing your license and prison time." The officers moved in. One of them took the laptop from the table. Another took the notary seal box. I stood by the door, watching. I did not say a word. I did not need to. Every time Kendra opened her mouth, she dug the hole deeper. She was waiting for me to scream at her, She wanted me to engage, to give her a reason to play the victim, to say we were just two sisters fighting over an inheritance. But I denied her that oxygen. I stood there, clutching my purse, looking at her with a calm, detached sadness. Kendra looked at me, pleading now. Chloe, tell them we can work this out. Do not let them arrest me. Think about Mom and Dad. Think about the family reputation. I thought about the empty velvet box on the lawn. I thought about the key turning in the lock. I thought about the 2:15 deadline she had set to sell my home out from under me. Pierce pulled out a pair of handcuffs. The metal clicked as she ratcheted them open. Kendra Thomas, Pierce said, reciting the words that every criminal dreads. You are under arrest. Kendra started to cry. It was not a cry of remorse. It was the angry, frustrated sobbing of a child who has been told no for the first time in her life. I will sue you, she screamed, as the officer turned her around. I will take everything. I watched them lead her out of the glass-walled conference room. The entire office was watching. The Pinevale receptionists, the clients in the lobby. Everyone was staring at the woman in the expensive blazer being marched out in cuffs. Pierce stopped in front of me. She held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside was Kendra's phone. We will need a statement from you at the station, Pierce said gently. But for now, the sale is stopped. The files are sealed. The house is safe. Thank you, I whispered. Do not thank me, Pierce said, looking at the door where Kendra had just exited. Thank Grandpa. If he had not kept those cameras rolling, this would have been a he said, she said civil case that dragged on for years. You brought the receipts. I walked out of the building. The sun was high in the sky now. It was 2:30 in the afternoon. The deadline had passed. The deed had not recorded. The house was still mine. I got into my car and sat there for a long moment, my hands resting on the steering wheel. I was exhausted, but for the first time in 24 hours. The tightness in my chest was gone. I looked at the passenger seat where the empty space was. I would have to go back to the darkroom. I would have to find the rest of the collection. I had a feeling Kendra had not just taken one lens, but that was a problem for later. Right now, I just wanted to go home and change the locks again, just in case. The warrant was signed in less than 40 minutes. Usually, obtaining a search warrant for a private residence in a financial crime case takes days of bureaucratic wrangling. But the video evidence from Pinevale was undeniable. We had the fraudulent notarization, the impersonation, and the active attempt to transfer a deed worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. The judge saw the glitch video of Kendra in the wig and signed the order immediately, while I sat in the precinct break room, drinking stale coffee and signing a mountain of affidavits. Detective Pierce led a team to Kendra's apartment. I did not go with them. I did not want to see where she lived. I wanted to keep the image of her in handcuffs as the last memory of the day. When Pierce returned 2 hours later, she looked grim. She placed a heavy evidence box on the table between us. It was not just your house, Chloe, Pierce said, sitting down heavily. We found a workshop inside Kendra's pristine, high-rise apartment, hidden in a false bottom of her vanity drawer. They had found a fraud kit. There were pre-printed quitclaim deed forms for 3 different counties. There was a laminated cheat sheet titled How to Bypass E-Recording Verification, which detailed exactly how to trick the facial recognition software used by online notary services. And most damning of all, there was a folder labeled with my address, but it was not the only folder. Pierce slid a notebook across the table. It was open to a list of names and addresses. Some were crossed out, some were circled. She has been scouting, Pierce said. Elderly neighbors, people in nursing homes. She looks for properties where the title chain is weak or the owner is incapacitated. We found a notary stamp in her closet that was reported stolen from a clerk in another district 3 years ago. She has been building a machine to steal real estate. I felt a cold shiver run through me. I had thought this was about jealousy. I thought it was about Grandpa choosing me. But it wasn't. I was just another line on her spreadsheet. I was a target of opportunity. The realization made the betrayal less personal, but infinitely more terrifying. She was a predator. The digital forensics came back from Pinevale too, Pierce continued, tapping a tablet. The IP address used to upload the forged power of attorney matches the router in Kendra's apartment. The email confirmation was sent to a burner account she accessed from her phone. We have her dead to rights on wire fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Pierce handed me a stack of papers. This is a temporary protective order. It bars her from coming within 500 feet of you or the property. It forces her to surrender all keys, passcodes, and access devices related to your estate. It is effective immediately. I signed the papers. My hand was steady. I want to go home, I said. I need to check the darkroom again. If she had a list, and she stole the stamp, she might have taken more from the house than just the lens. Pierce nodded. I will drive you. We need to log the rest of the camera collection as potential assets or evidence anyway. We arrived back at the house just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The police tape was still across the front door, a stark yellow warning to the neighbors that the show was over. We ducked under it. The house felt different now. It felt secured. The locksmith had done his job, and the knowledge that Kendra was in a holding cell made the air feel lighter. But the basement still held a heaviness I could not shake. We went down to the darkroom. Pierce turned on the main light, flooding the space with a harsh, yellow glow that chased away the shadows. Show me where the missing lens was, Pierce said, pulling on latex gloves. I pointed to the velvet box still sitting on the work table where I had left it. It belongs in there, a Noctilux, very rare. Pierce began to photograph the shelf. Moving systematically from left to right, I stood next to her, watching her work, as she moved a heavy, large-format camera to check behind it. I noticed something odd about the wooden shelf itself. The wood grain on the bottom shelf did not align perfectly with the support bracket. It was off by a fraction of an inch. Wait, I said. I reached out and touched the wood. It was loose, not broken, but designed to slide. Grandpa was a carpenter before he was a photographer, I murmured. I pushed on the panel. It clicked, a spring-loaded mechanism releasing with a soft thump. The false bottom of the shelf popped up. Pierce shone her flashlight into the cavity. Well, she said, it seems everyone in this family has secrets. Inside the hidden compartment, there was no money, there were no jewels. There was just a single, white envelope. On the front, in Grandpa's distinct, blocky handwriting, was one word, Chloe. I picked it up. The paper was old, slightly yellowed. It had been sitting there for a long time. Open it, Pierce said softly. I tore the seal. Inside was an index card with a string of numbers, a code, and a short note. She is a storyteller, Chloe, but she tells the wrong stories. If she ever tries to rewrite the will with paper, use this. I looked at the code. It was an alphanumeric sequence. That is a file key, I said, recognizing the format. For the DVR system, I moved to the hidden recorder in the wall, the one I had accessed the night before. I plugged in the mouse and keyboard. I navigated to the archive folder. There was a partitioned drive, locked and password protected. I typed in the code from the index card. Access granted. A list of video files appeared. They were dated 5 years ago, long before Grandpa got sick. Long before the will was read. I clicked the first file. The screen filled with the image of the living room. It was daytime. Grandpa was sitting in his armchair, cleaning a camera. Kendra was pacing back and forth in front of him. She looked younger, sharper, her ambition raw and unpolished. You cannot give it to her, Kendra was saying on the video. Her voice was clear. She does not know the value. Grandpa, she will just live in it. I can develop the land. I can turn this lot into a 4-unit rental. It is equity. It is a home, Grandpa said calmly, not looking up from his lens. It is a waste, Kendra shouted. She slammed her hand on the table. If you do not sign the transfer to me, I will find a way. You know I will. Grandpa stopped cleaning. He looked up at her. Is that a threat, Kendra? Kendra leaned in. Her face twisted with that same greed I had seen on the porch. It is a promise. I will take it back with paper. I will bury her in legal fees until she begs me to buy it. I know how the system works." Grandpa stared at her for a long moment. He did not yell. He did not argue. He just looked at the camera lens sitting on the table, the one he knew was recording. "I know you do," Grandpa said quietly. "That is why I am making sure the system sees you." The video ended. I sat back in the chair, the silence of the basement ringing in my ears. Grandpa had known. He had known 5 years ago that she would try this. He had not just installed the cameras to catch burglars. He had installed them to catch his granddaughter. He knew she was a liar, and he knew that the only way to beat a liar in court is to let them speak into a microphone. "She said it," Pierce said. Her voice filled with professional admiration. "I will take it back with paper. That establishes premeditation going back years. It destroys any defense that this was a sudden lapse in judgment or a misunderstanding." "He left this for me," I said, my voice trembling. "He knew I would need it." "He gave you the smoking gun," Pierce agreed, "but he made sure you were the one to pull the trigger." I looked at the empty velvet box on the table. Kendra had stolen the lens. Yes, she had tried to steal the house, but she had failed to steal the one thing that mattered. She had failed to steal the narrative. Grandpa had made sure of that. Even from the grave, he was still directing the scene. The bail hearing took place 48 hours after the arrest. The courtroom smelled of floor wax and stale anxiety, a scent that seemed to stick to the back of my throat. Kendra stood at the defense table. She was not wearing her power suit or her heels. She was wearing a county-issued orange jumpsuit that washed out her complexion, and her hair, usually perfectly styled, hung limp around her face. She looked small. She looked like a victim. That was her strategy. Her lawyer, a frantic man named Mr. Henderson, who looked like he had not slept in 2 days, started his opening statement by painting this as a tragic family misunderstanding. "Your Honor," he pleaded, gesturing to Kendra, "this is a civil dispute between sisters. It is a squabble over an inheritance that got out of hand. My client was merely trying to expedite paperwork to protect the asset. There was no malicious intent. It was a good story, but the prosecutor, a sharp woman named District Attorney Miller, did not deal in stories. She dealt in timestamps." "Objection," Miller said, standing up. She did not raise her voice. She simply pressed a button on her laptop. "The people refute the claim of accidental or civil intent. We have digital forensics that prove premeditation." Miller played the audio clip from the hallway camera. My sister's voice rang out through the silent courtroom, clear and cold. 2:15, done is done. "That is not the voice of a confused heir," Miller stated. "That is the voice of a woman executing a deadline. That is the voice of a woman who knew exactly when the county clerk's server would refresh." Kendra flinched. She looked down at the table, refusing to meet my eyes. Then Miller played the video from the Pinevale notarization session on the large monitors mounted on the walls. The courtroom watched a woman in a bad wig and oversized glasses pretend to be me. The image was grainy, distorted by the glare my sister had intentionally engineered, but the voice was undeniable. "The defense claims this was a technical glitch," Miller continued. "The state calls it identity theft. We have the log files from the notary software showing that the facial recognition warning was manually overridden, and we have this." She held up a stack of papers. "These are Chloe Thomas's hotel receipts and flight records. At the exact moment this imposter was signing a durable power of attorney in front of a webcam in this jurisdiction, the real Chloe Thomas was checking into a hotel in Chicago, 400 miles away." The judge, a stern man with thick eyebrows, looked at the screen, then at the receipts, and finally at Kendra. His expression hardened. "This is not a civil dispute, counselor," the judge said to Kendra's lawyer. "This is a sophisticated fraud ring operating out of a luxury apartment." Kendra's lawyer tried one last pivot. "My client has no prior criminal record. She is a respected member of the real estate community." "She is a predator," Miller countered. "We found a list of other potential victims in her home, and we found stolen property." Miller motioned to the bailiff, who brought forward an evidence bag. Inside was the black Leica Noctilux lens. "This item was recovered from the defendant's safe," Miller said. "It is a vintage camera lens valued at over $5,000. It was removed from the victim's home during the break-in. This is not just forgery. This is grand larceny." Kendra went pale. She had thought the lens was just a trophy, a piece of glass she could sell on the side. She did not realize it was the weight that would sink her. The value of the lens pushed the theft charge into a higher felony class. The judge slammed his gavel. "Bail is denied. The defendant is a flight risk and a danger to the financial security of the community. A protective order is granted for 5 years. All assets related to the defendant are frozen pending a restitution hearing." Kendra looked at her lawyer, panic rising in her eyes. "You said I would get bail," she whispered, loud enough for the microphone to catch. "Be quiet," her lawyer hissed back. Later that afternoon, the plea deal came down. The evidence was too overwhelming for a trial. The video of the break-in, the audio of the phone call, the fake notary session, the stolen lens. It was a mountain she could not climb. Kendra accepted the deal. She pleaded guilty to felony forgery and grand larceny, in exchange for not being charged with federal wire fraud. She agreed to 18 months in a state correctional facility, followed by 3 years of probation. She also had to pay full restitution for the damage to the house and the legal fees. But the real punishment was not the prison time, it was the record. When the judge asked her how she pleaded, Kendra had to say the word guilty. She had to admit it into the public record. That meant she would lose her real estate license. She would be barred from working in finance. The career she had built, the reputation she valued more than her own family, was gone. She was now a convicted felon. The system she had tried to weaponize had turned around and branded her. I watched them lead her away in handcuffs. She did not look back. She walked with her head down, defeated not by me, but by the truth she thought she could outsmart. I went home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the lawn where my life had been scattered just days before. The grass was clear now. The door had a new, reinforced steel frame. I had hired a security company to install a modern alarm system with cellular backup and glass break sensors. But before I went inside, I stopped at the small table in the entryway. I placed Grandpa's old Rolleiflex camera there. It was not plugged in. It did not have a digital sensor inside. It was just a piece of mechanical history, a box of glass and mirrors. But I left it facing the door. It was a reminder that lies have a shelf life, but the truth is permanent. A reminder that you never know who is watching. "You were right, Grandpa," I whispered to the empty room. "You were always right." I touched the cold metal of the camera, then turned and walked into my kitchen to make a cup of tea. The house was quiet. It was safe. And for the first time in a long time, it was truly mine. If a family member used the law to try and steal your home, would you be able to forgive them? Or would you let the justice system do its job? Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and share your thoughts on what you would have done in my situation. Do not forget to subscribe to the Lily Revenge Stories channel. Like this video and hit the notification bell to help this story reach more people.